Thank you, Johnny, and to your board at the CPA Hong Kong. It's truly an honour to be asked to deliver this webinar titled Impact of Technology on the Business of Sport for your group and your members. And in company with my good friend and board member of the ASTN, Dr. Martin Schlegel, who also happens to be part of the VASIS Institute Global Expert Network, I also want to acknowledge the Chair, VASIS Group, Philip King, who has done an amazing job, and his vision and execution of building Asia's sports tech ecosystem, particularly after the last 12 months during COVID, which was a very difficult period. We still at VASIS were able to do a number of transactions, investments, partnerships and distribution agreements, and it was all due to Philip's drive, experience and connectivity into China and Hong Kong. I will commence the webinar with some opening remarks about the VASIS Group and then hand over to Martin to do the body of slides on the impacts of technology on sport with some case studies. And then I will conclude with a series of slides on the opportunities in sports tech in Asia with specific reference to Hong Kong and GBA area. Then I'll move to a Q&A session with Johnny and who will facilitate. An abridged version of these slides will be made available to the CPA Hong Kong members to distribute. Slide, Martin. Martin? Thank you. I would briefly like to introduce the VASIS Group. It commenced in 2019 and put simply, it's the pioneer and the architect of the Asian sports tech ecosystem. In its sports investment, it is a sports investment advisory institution focused on sports tech and digital health with a strong focus on the Hong Kong GBA area in China. VASIS connectivity is with companies across Asia, bringing together government, sports and technology stakeholders to provide an open innovation ecosystem that will create jobs, new exports, generate intellectual property and drive physical activity and digital health. As stated in the slide, you can see its current activities are ranging from sports investments to advisory and distribution, and its recent highlights range from the Asian Sports Tech Report, which will be released this year, through to our global partnerships with some of the globe's leading sports digital companies and innovation firms, as well as investments. You will see from some of the logos of the entities we are collaborating with this endeavour, many are familiar to you. Slide, Martin. More importantly, VASIS is focusing on bringing an entire new world-class sports technology ecosystem into Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. By 2030, Hong Kong will be internationally recognised as the new Silicon Valley for sports technology. You may laugh, but it has strong world-class quality manufacturing, a great talent pool of STEM people, fantastic capital markets, some of the world's best universities and research institutions, IP protection and common law. VASIS is pioneering the creation of the world's most valuable sports innovation ecosystem across the Greater Bay Area. VASIS's current strategic partners include the Australian Sports Technology Network, the world's leading ecosystem, Stack Sports, world's largest sports tech company, PMY, world-leading stadium technology company, Sports Tech World Series, the world's leading sports tech conferences. The inaugural Asian Sports Tech Conference will be hosted in Hong Kong in late 2021, subject, of course, to the health advice. Slide, Martin. ASTN, which I'm a founding chair, is now one of the top 6 innovation ecosystems in the world, and has taken the sector from 250 million GDP AUD in 2012 to AUD 1.2 billion in 2020, with job growth of 5,000 jobs plus M&A activity of 400 million. However, it did this with 4 main sectors that it was able to aggregate, whereas VASIS in Hong Kong has and continues to bring 6 main sectors together. VASIS is creating the open sports tech ecosystem in partnership with government, key sports stakeholders across 48 countries within Asia, including the most important manufacturing and Hong Kong's enormous investment community that Australia simply does not have. I will now hand over to Martin to take you through a few slides on what is sports technology. Thank you.
Yes, James, thank you very much for the introduction, and Johnny and CPA Australia, and thank you very much for the invitation to talk about sports technology today. And James indicated that I'll give you a couple of insights into what we regard as sports technology. And just to back on to what James was saying, we have obviously seen in Australia and being very globally connected as a small market with reach into other markets, that the connection that we've seen into the manufacturing is very, very important. And you will see this from some of the case studies. So there, the connection with VASIS and the ASTN makes a whole lot of sense from a technology point of view. So, but coming back to what is sports technology, or sports tech as it's called now, we at the ASTN identify sports technology by 4 quadrants: advanced materials, sensors and devices, medical health and biotech, and then the large area of information and communication technologies. So I have listed a couple of the subgroupings within these 4 quadrants. So obviously advanced materials is anything from fibers, textiles, apparel, composite materials, coatings that make up equipment, footwear, all of these kind of things that the athletes need. Sensors and devices are obviously talking about all of the measurement devices that we now can put on athletes. But as you will see, there is another dimension of that has to do with the connectivity or connectedness of all of these sensors and devices, so leading to a sports IoT. Medical health and biotech, you would all understand, from biomechanics to sleep and recovery, strength and conditioning, nutrition, all these sorts of things that actually are closely aligned with health tech and medical sciences. And then obviously the largely expanding information communication section with all of the mobile, online, big data and analytics, which now includes obviously machine learning, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality or mixed reality, and all of the analysis and predictions that are associated with the wagering markets, esports, fantasy sports, fan engagement. I'll have a lot of examples. But that's a technology view. That's sort of like a technology stack, as we call it. If you actually get into the application verticals of sports tech, it's roughly divided into 3 areas where elite sports encompasses elements of all the other elements. So on the left side, the business of sport and entertainment obviously deals with stadium, venues, the property where athletes play and spectators watch the events. The big area of media broadcasting, already mentioned augmented, virtual, and mixed reality to participate or train. And then esports, fantasy sports. And then on elite sport, which, as I said, encompasses both sides of this, obviously dealing with athlete performance and injury prevention, and then relying on a number of big data analysis, AR, machine learning. But we now see a progression into mass participation and active living, where sensors, wearable sensors and devices that were previously only available to elite athletes are now becoming consumer goods. We see a lot of adoption into wellness and medical areas. There have been lots of advancement in coaching and training techniques and others. We can then break it down a little bit further, and you see how granular this gets, but I don't want to dwell too much on that, because I really want to show you a couple of case studies. So in this case, one of the biggest lessons learned that I basically take from Australia is, traditionally Australians with development of sports technology have focused on the field. But we're now seeing a move to carry the on the field technology into off-the-field applications. And this is where some of the technologies that you see out of other sectors come and be applied in sport. So machine learning and artificial intelligence, I already mentioned. Blockchain, when it comes to ticketing, when it comes to merchandise and making sure that the authenticity of a jersey or a memorabilia is guaranteed. Fintech, because with all of these transactions that we do in a stadium, they're effectively related to payment portals. IoT, I already spoke about that, health and so on and so forth, and cyber. So there are a lot of applications where we now see that sport actually can be seen as a great validation platform. Because you have a small niche where you can try out certain things that then can be translated into other sectors. And I will give you a couple of examples of how this actually works from a case study point of view in the business of sport, high performance, and mass participation. So let's look at the stadium, for instance. Already talked about on-field data. And here's a couple of examples of what that can look like. But if you then get into the stadium itself, you'll see that the off-field data is a vast number of connection points that we have to think about. And I'll break it down in two case studies, one on the fan and the second on the infrastructure. So let's take the smart stadium. And I have one example here for you out of Northern America, because that was the first one where this particular technology was actually deployed in a stadium setting. And this was using biometric access management system to manage traffic flow, manage concessions, and help with transaction processing. So some of you might have heard about of this company Clear. They're also used at security checkpoints at airports in the United States. They have expanded their system to stadiums in the US in this particular case, because this was the first use case. But you can see how the paper ticket stub is effectively replaced with technology, and where we then can use the information that we gain to do other things in terms of the access management on site. A second example that I'd like to share with you is from the Netherlands, out of Amsterdam, the Johan Cruyff Arena, which is home to the soccer club or football club Ajax Amsterdam. And they have really embraced battery technology. So effectively using end-of-life car batteries set up with a smart battery power management system in the basement for a number of things. One is they will load up the batteries during off-peak hours and take advantage of different electricity rates. They will then store the electricity for load management during an event. And they can also use that as a means of should the grid go down. So these are two examples from a stadium setting where technology out of different areas is actually now being deployed in stadiums. So this brings this cross-section that I was talking about to the table, because we obviously, when we talk about concession management, transaction processing, that means we're getting into fintech, but we also have cybersecurity issues that we have to deal with, and so on and so forth. Now, the next case study I want to show you is about media and broadcasting. And this is a very, very interesting field, because we effectively have to deal with two verticals in that. One is obviously, once we can go back into the stadium, the live experience versus the at-home experience. And what's interesting is that actually similar technologies are driving the experience. So if you look at the sports news or sports data landscape, there's effectively three streams that that we see. There's the live broadcasting and streaming, obviously over the top OTT streaming. There is the data provision and data analysis, and then similarly for the prediction markets, the wagering markets, there's also a data provision angle here. And what's interesting is that technology is changing those verticals in the media and broadcasting very, very rapidly. So just a couple of highlights here. Obviously, our broadcasting and OTT streaming is now heavily reliant on high-speed Wi-Fi in stadiums, but also the 5G mobile deployment. The data analysis is actually a very interesting case study for artificial intelligence. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So for instance, when it comes to advanced computer visioning, that can be used today to actually produce highlights of a full match broadcast and maybe get out the goals that were scored. You can video sequence automatically by using algorithms. And then obviously from a machine learning point of view, that's the third area that's going to be massively impacted from the prediction markets. So these questions like descriptive, what did happen versus what will happen in terms of a predictive analysis, and the prescriptive analysis of what should happen. So you see how the way we consume, watch, and participate in sport is actually deeply impacted by technology. And so how we participate is actually in a case study in terms of fitness and recreation. And I'll just briefly touch on two areas again here, the quantified self and big data analysis. So if we look at an athlete today, and I'll talk about the difference between consumer and elite athletes in a moment, but you can see a list of parameters here from heart rate, blood oxygen level, all the way down to sleep. And what's interesting, and this is based on some work on colleagues here from Australia, there's this three-step process how you can analyze all of that data. You can map the body, sort of like a gauge of what's happening in the body. You can track the movement. And when you overlay these things, you can try to or start to optimize performance. So we're getting into things like mapping the body based on biometric testing. We can link that to nutrition, injury recovery. We can then get into motion capture with sensors and devices, impact protection, all the way into full complete athlete management. And I had already mentioned that obviously there is sensors and devices, wearables involved, and this is just a spread at the moment of what typically has been used versus in elite versus consumers. Mind you that my prediction of what's going to happen is a couple of things. One, as technology becomes more readily available, these artificial boundaries will actually disappear. And what was only available to elite athletes a couple of years ago might be tomorrow readily available on the street, and vice versa. What was deemed too inaccurate at the moment might improve in accuracy and might be adopted by elite athletes. So we will see a merge or a blend of these things going forward. And just to give you an example of how that's actually used, the city of Amsterdam did a running analysis on all of the activities of their public that were either walking, running, skating, cycling, or whatever they did. And they used, and I've just kept two that people might be using, two apps that are popular amongst runners or cyclists and things like that. And so the city of Amsterdam used that to actually map where people are active around their city and their suburbs. And this is very, very important because this is different activity from playing in a soccer team on a weekend or playing basketball in a team. This is unorganized sport, which nobody really has data at the moment. So the city of Amsterdam used this crowdsourced data to then see where are the preferences, where people are active. but they actually then based infrastructure, for example, infrastructure investment decision on where the activity was actually occurring. So where does this leave us? So I already talked about that all this technology will be grouped together in what we now call the business of sport, or sports management business. And you see here a couple of things from participation, registration, membership, where payment, membership in clubs or teams or in events will be organized in completely different ways, and much more professional into the future. So James, with that, I hand back to you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much for that. It's now important that we relate all this to the opportunities for sports tech companies, government, researchers, universities, manufacturers, capital markets, accountants, and lawyers. I will endeavour in the next few slides to build a compelling narrative on the sports tech and its future growth in Asia, with focus on Hong Kong, GBA, China, and why this will be the next great wave of economic activity. Slide, Martin. Vastus research sees sports market globally being driven by China. As you can see, an increase of 10% in the period 2019 to 2025 is predicted. Significant investments in sport is gathering enormous impetus now, and with what will come a desperate need for sports innovation in digital products. With Hong Kong, GBA, China in particular, having a huge take-up of mobile smartphones, data digitalization, Hong Kong in particular is very well placed to lead this. Slide. Vastus also sees these four key areas of sports growth in the next of 20% in the adoption of sports tech in the areas of wearable, health and fitness, stadium venues, and digital health, which Martin referred to earlier. Slide. Vastus believes that the global sports tech market will be the most rapid in India, China, Australia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, which are home to the major sports leagues and active participants in sports such as cricket, hockey, badminton, football, athletics, esports, and basketball. The continuous growth in internet adoption, social media analytics, cloud computing, IoT, and smart devices is the major technological growth prospect in the region. This growth is positively impacting the adoption of sports technologies to enhance spectator experience and stadium operations. My belief actually is not that it will be 31 billion, but I would expect from what I've seen over the last few years that it will be at least $40 billion. Slide, Martin. Factors influencing this take-up of wearables during the forecast period are the growing electronics industry coupled with the rapid rise in disposable income in the region. Examples of wearables being eyewear, wristbands, smartwatches, tokens, clip-ons, footwear, wearables, and attachable cameras, which many, I think, of you already use. In China, the wearables market has taken on a different shape, fueled partly by the purchases of growing affluent consumers. The presences of vendors such as Xiaomi and Huawei, among others, add to the growth of the Chinese smart wearables market. Moreover, the demand for fitness trackers in the region is expected to rise, owing to an increase in the population rate, advancement in technology, and stable economic growth. Fitness trackers are widely accepted by Chinese consumers, owing to a rise in the awareness towards fitness amongst the people in the country. Slide. With the growth of sports in region, particularly in China, Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, we see the need to develop and build sports stadiums and venues precincts. The factors propelling the smart stadium market are an increased focus on fan engagement experiences at stadiums that Martin mentioned before, growing adoption of IoT technologies to efficiently manage stadium infrastructure, and the advent of green initiatives and security regulations by sports governing bodies. More importantly, there is a need for this infrastructure to ensure the growth of sports participation in the region. Our intelligence sees over 170,000 small to large stadiums and venues needing to be upgraded or built to cope with this burgeoning sports market in China alone. With this enters 5G and its importance to this. We see enormous opportunities here. We are already partnering with one of the world's leading sports stadium tech infrastructure firms and have one of the world's best 5G experts as part of our team. Slide. Adding to this phenomena and fueling this is the health, wellness and fitness industry, which I mentioned earlier in my presentation, as did Martin. It covers wellness, tourism, personal care, beauty, anti-aging, fitness of body and mind, healthy eating, all of which are booming. The global wellness economy is growing to $4 trillion. At the same time, we're seeing 3.2 billion workers who are unwell. So obviously the demand is meeting the supply. It is important on government, it's incumbent on governments and industry to ensure that its workforce is fit and well to ensure future productivity. Slide. Digital health is stated to increase by 29% CAGR growth to 2025, with China leading the way in the adoption of digital health, showing that China's percentage of healthcare professionals using digital health technology or mobile apps at 94% against 15 other countries in Asia, which are only averaging at 78%. Next slide, Martin. VASIS also supports the Hong Kong and GBA government statements that Hong Kong GBA zone will be the world leading economic zone. The GBA sports zone will rely on Hong Kong for its innovation, its capital markets and knowledge. Together, the 70 million people and 1.5 trillion GDP of the Greater Bay Area make Hong Kong ideally positioned to create new jobs, new exports, new IPOs, new education opportunities, new research and development, and new intellectual property. Slide, Martin. VASIS also believes, and this is the knockout slide, that China aims to grow to the sports industry by contributing 2.5% of their GDP to sports and sports tech, similar to the United States, Europe, and Australia. This is a great game changer. China will invest hundreds of billions of dollars annually to create a 600 billion sports industry by 2025. Foreign companies will need to invest in Hong Kong as the key global hub in this area because of its expertise, its knowledge, its trade, its jobs, and the IPO and exit, and being the IPO market leader of the world over the past 9 years as Hong Kong X has been. For you, the CPA audience, I suggest many of you will be in time extremely busy servicing all of this. Next slide, Martin. VASIS believes that the two world-leading top stock exchanges, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Shenzhen Connect, and the world's #1 electronics home of fastest growth GDP cities, China's Greater Bay Area, will be a sports powerhouse by 2030. It has all the ingredients and the capabilities. Slide, Martin. So what are the most popular sports with great passion? In China and Hong Kong, they are for sports and entertainment. This is such a fertile ground for growth. Next slide. VASIS also sees Asian investment opportunities in sports tech for any investor as being athletic, performance tech, media and content related platforms, esports, in-venue entertainment, and data analytics and biometrics, as seen on the slide in front of you. Slide, Martin. Finally, supporting the previous slides, we emphasize that China and Hong Kong can grow high quality health expenditure compared to the Western world economies. Sports tech can be used in related areas such as wellness, sleep, aged care, and wearables, which can only occur in an environment that has highly skilled workforce, capital markets, allied healthcare, physiotherapy, and with great research universities that exist in Hong Kong. Sports tech is at the intersection of all of these areas. I want to thank you all and hope that you found this presentation today by Martin and I insightful and may inspire you to look beyond traditional industries and see sports tech as the next huge growth sector. Varsus certainly believes so. Varsus's transactions and research and M&A activities to date certainly support this. Back to you now, Johnny, for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Martin and James. I think this is a very comprehensive presentation that give a big picture about sport tech to our members. So let me, before we are waiting for the question from the floor, maybe I can start with a few. Okay, so could you tell us, based on your research and your understanding of Hong Kong market, okay, how does Hong Kong transfer its sports business using digital sport tech?
Martin, do you want me to handle this one?
Yeah, if you go, James.
Okay. Let's break up the sports sector. It consists of participation for people with all abilities, governance, high performance, competitions, volunteering, entertainment, and the engine of any sports sector across the globe. This is standard 101. These areas are not done well even in many OECD countries. Australia has led the world in some of these areas, and we have 3 companies alone who dominate these areas. One of them will be speaking tomorrow, Game Day. Now, what you need to do is add the 5G. You need to automate and make things easy for people who are time poor to reduce laborious activities, improve your talent pool from Hong Kong, for ticketing, for events, improve grassroots participation, high performance sports. Then digitalisation is so important and should be included using the amazing talent pool of ICT knowledge that Hong Kong does have by offering growths to sports and ICT companies who can assist sports move to digitalisation in areas such as automation, AI, blockchain to protect their transactions and use 5G. Varsus is very active in this area, Johnny. You also can have grants to create end-to-end sports entertainment fan engagement, volunteering systems, talent ID that include need to employ AI, blockchain, which are the fintech applications, and 5G, esports maturity by better analytics and sponsorship. So all of these are a classic example whereby the government in Hong Kong giving incentives to these things and bringing the knowledge that Hong Kong and its capital markets together. These are the main things that can actually transform the sports businesses and digitize them in Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you, James. So the next question from the floor is, okay, so how is the prospect of sport function fabric or clothes, especially for recovery and performance, both the function in China and Southeast Asia?
Martin, would you like to do that one?
Yeah. So I guess there's a couple of things to say about, and I take it that this question goes into smart clothing and into integrating wearables or sensors into clothing, if I understand the question correctly. So let me, on that basis, there's a couple things to consider here. Yes, there is ways to integrate also sensors right now into the clothing or apparel as we know it, but we still have a little bit of work to do in terms of harvesting the power in these devices or in the apparel, because you always have to juggle two aspects. One is the functionality of what you want to measure, but the other is the safety of the athlete. And particularly with let's say, sensors or devices that rely on power and have high power consumption, then the question is, where do we place the batteries? And how do we actually ensure that when the battery is also placed into the garment or into what the athlete is wearing, how does that prevent, let's say, an injury if the athlete falls, or an impact in like a team sports? Now, what is interesting about this effectively is that is the ultimate where the athletes want to go, because elite athletes hate if they have to get into a game and need, let's say, more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes just to be all wired up and ready. It disturbs their preparation phase for the actual competition. So from that perspective, a functional fabric or clothing that you just slip into would be ideal. However, because of questions about battery and in some cases flexibility of the sensors and devices, we haven't seen that that type of clothing has sort of met the expectations of the athlete just yet.
Thank you, Martin. So the next questions. In your media and broadcast segment, you mentioned how sports viewing could be divided into from home or in stadium. So with the sort of digital reliance the pandemic has caused, do you think the stadium will still be able to operate at maximum capacity in the future, or will a stronger emphasis be placed on going digital?
Look, I can probably answer that in two ways. From a general perspective, we have seen a massive adoption of technical solutions in the sports broadcasting. For instance, the dubbing of stadium sound when there are no spectators in the stands, and overlaying that with the broadcast feed, so that if you are at home, you are actually going to get a complete picture, including the audio, as you would normally expect it when the stadium is full. But there's also a different question or different aspect in this question, and this is about the safety or when can we go back to capacity. And so here is a thought that obviously with, let's say, biometrics and having the ability to scan temperatures rapidly upon entry of a venue, or calculating the capacity and knowing who are close contacts amongst a group that goes to a stadium, then I can actually allocate seating effectively almost on demand, so that groups that belong together sit together, then there is a little bit of space around. So it becomes effectively an optimization question. And I know that some companies that are into quantum computing and high-speed data analysis are looking at mathematical models to actually look at these scenarios. So then the final aspect of that is, I think we'll see a combination. The home experience will obviously be enhanced by all sorts of digital ways of enhancing the broadcast feed, from providing data along with that. So there's actually going to be another aspect of it. In certain circumstances, if you look at, and I look at my children, for instance, and they watch a sporting event no longer on TV, they actually stream it on a mobile device, but then they have a second device to get all the stats. So they're actually seeing more, in some instances, remote than someone in the stadium would see. So I see the challenge actually different. The challenge for a stadium owner will be to provide more add-on to the in-stadium patron to actually make it worthwhile to come back. Now you can say, well, the in-stadium experience, that's really what we go for into the stadium. So I think that will have a large attraction once it's possible to go back in. But then again, you come into these questions: how can you actually safely fill the capacity, and how can you do that on demand? And I think that's where we see a lot of digital infrastructure being deployed.
And Johnny, just to add to Martin's comments, there's no doubt that despite the COVID, but with now the vaccination starting and a number of countries basically quarantining everything now, we're starting to see some big stadiums now being filled. Like we have a stadium in Melbourne which has got 100,000 seating capacity. That went from 25 to 50%. And we have a big game on Sunday, for instance, and that's going to 75 to 80% of its capacity. So I still think there is a great thirst for people, particularly in sports-loving countries, to try and get back into the stadiums. And I think the authorities are obviously doing all the things that Martin was saying in terms of the scanning, the temperature, and all of that. But I think there will be a move back to get into the stadiums.
Oh, thank you, Martin and James. So trend of how the sport technology industry develop and create any opportunity.
Yeah, you were cutting out, but I'll repeat the question real quick, Johnny. So this was about the changes that we've seen during COVID-19 and the trend of how the sports technology industry will develop and create opportunities or challenges for the industry. So there's, again, it goes back to the digital transformation question. If you asked a year ago, or let's say 2 years ago, you asked any company, any organization in the world who is driving your digital transformation, it was it's our CEO, it's our CTO, or whoever in the C-suite. Last year we saw that there is another C called COVID, which actually drives digital transformation. So a lot of industries have been forced to change and adopt technology, and so the sports industry hasn't been isolated. Now, the fact that it is an event industry obviously saw a big change where there were no spectators, and we just talked about what will happen or what could happen to get spectators back in. But I'm thinking of the whole area of participation and grassroots sports, which actually is going to change as a result of that. Because we were confined to our homes, our apartments, or here in Australia, we were confined to a radius of 5 kilometers. So you had to exercise, you had to do things in a very small radius around your place of living. So things like that, you were doing gym classes or yoga classes from home, that you were doing a competition in terms of, let's say, weightlifting from home over video with video sessions with your friends or partners or competitors. We even saw people participating in cycling from their home apartment and things like that, but like on a machine, looking at a video screen that had the Tour de France, let's say, playing in front of them, and then they were riding. So we will see a lot more of that individualized sporting activity that can occur in any place. So that, I think, is going to be the biggest change to the sports industry.
And Johnny, just to give you an example there, we have one company, a startup, that started doing training for netball, which is a game that is very popular in most British Commonwealth countries. That lady went from 0 to hundreds of thousands of young women tuning into her sessions on coaching in netball right across the British Commonwealth World. She started a business and exploded within 12 months. We have other companies that have developed virtual fighting championships using VR and being able to fight anywhere in the world against anyone with the use of special gloves that can almost give you the impact of the fighting situation. So, as Martin said, I think this whole area of health and fitness has just boomed as a result of the COVID, and it's got a very strong impact going forward.
Thank you, James and Martin. Can you hear me actually?
Yes,
now
I can.
Now I
Okay,
can.
that's
Yeah.
good.
Good.
That's good. That's good. I just want to confirm that you can hear me. So we still have a couple questions on the floor. Okay, so with the growing maturity of computer vision and machine learning, do you see a trend to move away from dependency on wearables to more optical-based data and analytics?
Yeah. Yeah, very good question. And this will be actually the future, that we won't rely on sensors and devices any longer, and we will basically be able to point a mobile device with a high-resolution video camera at an athlete and get a number of performance data points from that video stream. So, but we're not there yet, because there's a couple of things to understand. In order to get to that point, we actually have to align and map what we currently measure in terms of wearables and devices and link that to the exact video analytics. And that hasn't been done, because that isn't trivial in itself. Because if you think about, think about measuring time. If you measure time on different devices, if you haven't a highly synchronized timing device, then you might be off by a split second. Then the interpretation of these algorithms potentially is skewed or biased. So that's number one. So we need to, in order for this to work and solely rely on video, we need to actually merge the information and out of the sensors and devices with the exact video feed. Once we do that, we can then build models. And for instance, once we can build a digital twin, we actually then have the mathematical models that we then can compare to the video feed. But we're still away from that. But the future will go to that, what is called markerless video analysis. Yeah.
And Johnny, there's one company recently that got bought by Sports Radar, which did exactly what Martin was talking about. It's but it's very much in small stadiums like basketball, in areas which are confined with squares. I haven't heard yet in large stadiums, but in terms of areas like basketball, volleyball, and all of these areas, this particular company had that technology that Martin was talking about, but it did get bought, I think just last month, Martin, by Sports Radar.
Yeah, exactly. And just to add to that, so to that question, there is examples in individual sports where you can film someone and from the video feed analyze whether the skill execution is to the best, let's say, standard. But when it comes to team sports, as James said, we're probably we're still a bit away from analyzing 22 players on a football pitch and get everybody's biometric, well, not biometric, everybody's performance data out of just the video feed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Martin and James. So probably because of time limit, we have one last question from the floor. So are there any Australian sport tech company being applied in the coming Tokyo Olympic Games?
You go first, Martin. I've got a couple already.
Yeah, there is a couple Australian companies. So, for instance, my understanding is that the whole of athlete management is done with a system by a company called Fusion Sports. They have a product called SmarterBase, which basically takes a whole of athlete picture from nutrition, from sleep data, from performance data during training, during practice sessions, competition, and blends that all together to basically get a performance a picture of the performance level of that particular athlete. I think some of the sports are using the other Australian company called Catapult Sports, who have pioneered GPS tracking devices that athletes in team sports wear between their shoulder blades. There's probably a couple companies in terms of
There's another one, Martin, Vold from Queensland, which is
from an injury recovery point of view, correct, James? There is a strength and conditioning company that has developed hardware devices and analytical software to measure the strength and the muscle condition of athletes in various different poses.
And I think there's another one being used by a Japanese company with Australian technology that will be able to measure the number of times that logos and sponsors and brands are identified during the course of the games as well. So there are a number of Australian, and look, those companies like Fusion, Vold and Catapult, for instance, are used by, as example, Johnny, over 7,000 elite sporting clubs, leagues and competitions are using their particular technology. So in the area of sports performance, high performance, etc., it's a no-brainer. The Australians have done very, very well.
Okay, thank you, James and Martin. So thank you so much for sharing today. I think we all know about how sport tech affect the sport business and the potential of sport technology. So tomorrow, we have invited Andy, CEO of GameDate, a sport tech company from Australia, which engage in providing digital platform and fintech solution to a number of well-known sport associations. And also we have Robin McRobin, CEO of Hong Kong Rugby Union. Basically, he's the guy who behind the Hong Kong Rugby 7. Okay, to discuss how sport tech enhance and transform the sport industry. So once again, thank you, James and Martin.
Thank you very much, Johnny. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny.
And I see you all tomorrow. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.